Hi, folks, and welcome to Inside the Leader's Mind, where what's in the way becomes the way. I'm your host, David Susan, and joining us today is Karina Bensko. She's the CEO of Culture Crew and a trusted advisor to executives navigating high growth chaos. With over 12 years in HR strategy and people operations, she's helped companies scale from startup to global organizations, solving problems before a payroll mistake becomes a trust issue, and before we'll figure out HR out later becomes a retention crisis. Karina specializes in bringing structure to the messy middle of growth, designing organizational plans and HR systems that are good enough to launch today and built to evolve tomorrow. Karina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, if I could just read an intro, that would be amazing. But,
You know,
I do my best. So
I mean, one
tell,
day.
tell me a little bit about who you are and tell me a little bit about Culture Crew, or tell me how you got to where you're at and what led you to Culture Crew and what they do. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, sure. So, as you mentioned, I have 12 years of HR experience, and I've really seen the whole gambit of kind of how HR runs at multiple sizes. And um, when I was thinking about where I wanted to be after my latest birth of my son, um, I realized I really wanted to be in the startup scene. I love, building and scaling and breaking things and then building again. And, you know, when I was reflecting on the type of organizations I wanted to work for, I realized they weren't really ready for a head of people. We weren't at that size yet. Funding might not support that, but they still need that strategy. They still need that level of support and guidance. So that's where Culture Crew kind of came out of, and thinking about how can I still support those organizations, but in a way that fits their budgets, but then also helps them be effective today going into tomorrow.
And how did you decide to go your own route with your own business, Culture Crew, versus really just going head of people or HR for a larger, big organization and moving up the corporate ladder, et cetera?
Yeah. So I've done that. I did corporate America for years. And there's a lot of bureaucracy, red tape, the speed in which I just love to work. You know, it just wasn't really it's just not really there in corporate America, unfortunately. Just because you need a lot of stakeholders and a great idea, in inception is fantastic, but there's just so many levels of like buy-in that of course you have to get versus in a startup environment, like you can just go and fail fast. And then if it doesn't work or you need to iterate really quickly, you can do that as long as, of course, you're staying within the laws and what is like typical. And of course, you definitely don't want to build something that is non-compliant, but, it's really a place that you can, experiment a little bit and push the boundaries of what's possible.
How did you, because doing your own thing can be scary.
Mm-hmm.
Many people, I talk to so many people that have been in corporate America, and I've been self-employed for forever, for a very long time. And people are like, how do you do it? That's so scary. And so how was that transition for you to go from that corporate world to doing your own thing? And did you have someone in your family that modeled that? Because sometimes I see that.
Actually, no. So I have these two women in my life who they were, in my age group, they're moms, and both of them actually they passed away.
Oh, really?
Um, you know, and when thinking about what I really wanted to be doing and the type of life I wanted to be living, especially the type of mom I wanted to be to my two kids, um, in August, one of them passed away, and that was really a catalyst as well, where I was thinking about, you know, what what time do I have? Because time is not, it's not promised. And what what type of environments and ways do I want to work? And when you're like, of course, when you're your own CEO and your own boss, you can manage your time. You can lead with your values, and you can also build out a kind of company that really you're excited to work for because it's yours. But then also, you can kind of manage your time how you see fit. um, but yeah, the past, I mean, I didn't see anybody doing this in my personal life. But I did actually have a mentor of mine, just through networking and conversation. She's actually the one that even said, why don't you do this? Like, you've got enough experience. You're really talented. You're amazing. Why don't you try going the fractional route, get an LLC, and like make the leap? And kind of with those kind of different pieces together, it really made me say, why not? Like, let's do this. Let's try it out. Really let me bet on myself. Especially since I was so sure about the type of companies I wanted to work with. And the way into that was just through my own LLC and being able to have a lot of fun along the way, just building something that I think is really cool.
So cool. I love that. And I love hearing those kind of, in a way, origin story, how people start.
Yeah.
Um, so you're in HR. When did you first realize you loved HR?
When I was 19 years old, I was in college.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. So I was in college. I was a freshman, and um I actually studied psychology. So, being in the minds of the people was always kind of part of my track. But when I initially was thinking about where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do, initially it was going to be a clinical psychologist. I had my whole path, you know, out there, and I was ready to go. Um, but then as I actually took a course freshman year in HR Management 101, because my college allowed us to take courses in our major classes and minors freshman year. I just fell in love. I was like, "This is the coolest profession in the world. Um, Tell me more." And then as I kind of went along in my career, I just fell more and more in love with what HR is, and also seeing the evolution in the last 12 years, because it is so different in terms of how HR shows up in the workplace. There's very much a new guard approach of uh not really. I don't like. I hate the seat at the table approach. I think we are the table because we are in the middle of like every single part of how the business operates. Because the people are the ones doing the work. So we're really the specialists to that.
Very cool. And I know we had talked ahead of time when we first met each other here, and you talked about HR is balloons and cupcakes, and you said, it's really not. HR is business
Mhm.
strategy. What was the moment with that shifted for you where you realized, oh, HR isn't just, make because that's what everyone says. I want to get in HR because it's just going to be, you know,
Mhm.
they don't say balloons and cupcakes, but what was the moment
Yeah.
when that shifted for you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had a sense that that's where HR was. I had a really amazing professor that, talked to the strategy and talked to the reasons why HR is there in the first place. But it was really a mentor of mine when I first got into the workforce. Like, it was my very first job. And she actually was the one that was like, listen, we are not the party committee. We are, we're strategists. We are like doing like some real work here. So like, sure, we might be able to help with some party planning, work through the EAs, but like that's not our job. And so we need to make sure that like, we are really focused on the right things. We're focused on the business strategy. We're focused on employee engagement and retention. And even at 21 years old, I'm an HR coordinator. I'm still just trying to learn like the ropes of like how to be in corporate America full time, and having that sort of mindset like so early on in my career, I think really shaped how I kept going into other companies and other roles because I was so protective to make sure that like we were the strategists and we were actually driving value. And always seeing kind of how can we drive more value in any company.
Do you think this that what you learned there most people in HR know, or is there is there something else that um, you feel you've learned that a lot of HR people haven't yet learned?
I think every HR person wants that to be their role, especially if they see other people doing something similar. And I think um, there's sometimes where folks are like, how do I get into that kind of work? Like in HR business partnerships is really where a lot of strategy happens. That's kind of a newer arm of HR the last like 10 years or so. And just really thinking about being basically an HR strategist to a certain business group. Um, but I think every HR person wants it. I think and that's where a lot of questions are like, how do I get the seat at the table? How do I drive more value and not always knowing how to really align some of the programs that are being built? When we think about compensation, we think about onboarding, offboarding, performance management. It's a program that, is very much tied to a lot of HR strategy, but if you can't really speak to how it's going to help the employees, the leaders, et cetera, like everybody just rolls their eyes saying, oh, another program, oh, another process. Like, why is this so long without really understanding the why? And I think that's where some missing points are sometimes because we know the language, we know how like how it works, but if we use fluffy language like it's gonna drive the culture, people are like, yeah, and we have ROI to think about. Like we have end of quarter to think about. Like culture's great, but we gotta move. And so I think that's where the language is so important and being able to articulate how something actually saves the company money, how how empowering managers is actually going to impact not just the one person, but like 15 to 20 other people that of course they're managing. Like all those different components matter.
And that is, thank you for sharing that because it's true. We see it in a lot of organizations where we get so focused on doing the tactical side of the job, we forget how that piece fits into the overall business strategy that investors care about, that the executives care about, and connecting those dots, I think, are absolutely critical. As you look at what Culture Crew does, your business,
Hmm.
what is what's the core thing you do for founders that maybe they ignore until it's too late?
Um, One is talent strategy. So thinking about what skill sets do you have today? What skill sets are you going to need tomorrow? And really thinking about what that headcount planning is going to look like and that org design. So what is your org structure? What does your org structure look like today? And what does it need to look like tomorrow to, meet the business objectives, get that product out, and really kind of scale quickly. Um, and then also what is the culture like right now and what's the culture going like how do you want it to evolve? Because when of course you have your first 10 people, they're really bought into you as a person, and there's a lot of things that they can maybe let go or say, well, it's just a quirk or whatnot, but at a certain point employees are joining you as a company, so that culture really matters because how that culture evolves and grows, like it can either take a mind of its own and you know kind of snowball and everything, or you can really be purposeful and think about what are the values you want everybody to have, what type of environment do you want everyone to be working in, and uh what is the ways that someone will succeed here, because what one person's haven is could be one person's hell, like if those don't really align very well, and that's kind of where toxic cultures come in, is you know not being purposeful.
So you're talking about culture. Is that part of the reason your company? I should ask you, why is your company called Culture Crew? How did you choose that term?
So I love the name Culture Labs. I will say I use an AI tool to help me come up with the name. I threw in like culture, HR, strategy, Karina, um, and And then, a number of different names came up. So the K for crew is because my name's Karina. And
Mm.
it felt like sticky. I don't know, there was just something that drew me to it. And then as I actually socialized the names, because I had a couple ideas, people kept coming back to Culture Crew saying, that's really cool. Like, I love that name. And it just seems uh, sticky, unique. So like the culture piece is there because HR, but I also wanted it to be uh, bigger than just culture, thinking about like people and growth, and just kind of how. And then, of course, I can also, if I wanted to hire on employees, I could create a crew as well. But we'll see where I build.
So it plays well in there because you were talking about culture. So I thought, oh, maybe that's a core focus of
Hmm.
what you do, but just kind of the whole HR in general, right?
Yeah.
So I know we had talked, and you had mentioned that there's a difference between people ops
Hmm.
and real people strategy in a startup.
Hmm.
What can you explain the difference for our listeners? What do you mean by that?
So people operations is really the backbone of HR. You're thinking like think compensation, benefits, payroll, even though I always advocate for payroll to sit with finance, but um and the processes, onboarding, offboarding, like very tactical work that does have strategic value. But it's really the kind of the back of the house work that keeps the business running and is really necessary for any business to operate. Like you can't really have a company with an employees without being able to give them benefits, pay them, offboard them if they leave, etc. Um, but then when you think about like the people strategy, really what I'm referring to is kind of the ways to tie all of those like programs and other kind of ways that then you're going to build kind of along the way, to really tie into where's the company today? What are the kind of what do you really need to help? What do you need to do to help them scale effectively? And when's the right time to put in different processes? So, like a performance management process that is, as an example, that is like super robust, has like, 360 review plus, plus quarterly check-ins and all of these like different mechanisms for a company that's only like 15 employees, that can be a lot of uh, maintenance and just a really big process for a company that small. Like I would always advocate for maybe a start, stop, continue. Let's build up the muscle to have a conversation. Like we don't need to build an empire when we're still very small. Like we can kind of build out the frameworks, build out the uh muscle for how these things need to go, and then you build from there. And that's where the strategy comes in. It's say really questioning like when is the right time, what is actually going to help this stage, and then how do you kind of out of that foundation, scale up and make something more complex when it's needed.
So, and maybe this is part of what you're talking about,
Hmm.
but for clarity, I know in the introduction, we talk about building systems that are good enough
Hmm.
to launch
Hmm.
today. Can you elaborate on what you mean by good enough and why is this an issue that you can talk about?
Yeah. So when I say good enough, it's getting out of the mindset of we need to make this perfect before we put something in place. So think about onboarding as an example. Someone comes into your organization and you need to be able to help them understand their role, where they fit into the larger company, even if you're 15, 20 employees, but like, where does their role fit into maybe the sales process and the product strategy and process, in really helping them align kind of their role to the larger picture. And then also give them like the basics, like, what are their benefits? How do they get paid? What is, what do you value as a company? Like some really simplistic and basic things to help somebody feel like welcomed and really understand like what's expected of them. Um, and when I was actually at Cloud Health Technologies, it was a startup here in Boston. That was actually kind of a methodology I used of we had something called boot camp where it was a day long training to really help people understand kind of the cycle. And we had different executives come in and talk about their specific business group and give some understanding of what the goals were for that quarter and that year. So people had just a larger view of where the company is going. And then day one, it was the beginning, it really was just like, here's your laptop. Let's make sure IT gets in there. Here's a training. We'll do a quick onboarding training of like kind of what to expect. And kind of as you're here at Cloud Health. And then by the time we went from 120 employees to 300, boot camp was a lot more elaborate. It was a 2-day training. We had like a lunch. We really got a lot more detailed in kind of the business objectives. Day one was more elaborate, where we started having onboarding plans by different business group because we were at a size now where we might have like 3 SDRs joining. So now we can have a buddy program and very specific sales training for those individuals so they could actually sell faster. But again, like when you're scaling, you don't have to start at the onboarding plans, 3-day, 2-day training, you know, level. You can really just start at something where it just, really gets to the core of like, what do you really want this process to drive, which is I feel welcomed. I know what's expected of me and I can do my job tomorrow.
Cool. When you look at Culture Crew, would you say Culture Crew is more of a consultancy or is it more of a fractional HR? How do you position yourself? What's ideal? What do you prefer?
Yeah, I'm more fractional because I enjoy being tied to a company for a period of time, even if that's 6 months to 18 months. And I am with that company kind of through the evolution of change and growth until we get to a point where a full-time head of people really makes sense. Um, so I can really set that future head of people up for success because everything's built, it's in a good state, and then especially because with fractional you're only there maybe between 10 hours maybe 20 hours a week, even though I typically like to think about it more in months just because the ebbs and flows of business. And then of course we're not thinking about how many how many hours was I working, but then I do enjoy doing the projects, but you're only going then in to a different company for a very short period of time and then leaving. And I really enjoy being partnered um, for a longer engagement.
So if you were to look at that time period, where in a young company's stage
Hmm.
do they normally realistically need you? If it's two
Yes.
people, they don't, right? They're
Yeah.
two. When do they need you? And then at what point is it like you've done your mission and it's probably time to say goodbye? Meaning, I know when you say you need to bring on full time, but if there was
Hmm.
kind of that window that someone, and I know there's no definite, but what would you guesstimate based on your experience?
Yeah, I would say around 15 to 20 employees if you're about to double, meaning like you're going to be scaling really quickly and
There's
now
actually growth.
growth. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So basically, if you maybe we'll go from like 20 employees to 40 employees to 100 employees, and like you're now on this growth path where you're gonna be things are gonna be moving really quickly, and you are gonna need somebody there like to be not only building out the train tracks, but also help the executive team think strategically about where that company is going. And then I'd probably around like the 120, 150 employee mark is where I would start to say, hey, you know what? You know, I think maybe, especially if you're still on this growth path, having a full-time head of people who, you know, can really be here full time, I think really makes sense, especially if the team is starting to grow, and you're starting to think about kind of all the different uh, more junior level roles, that's kind of the really the place where I'd say, I think we should start thinking about this. Um, but especially in that smaller hyper growth stage, I think that's where my value is, I think, the best.
Is there something magic about that 15 to 20 employee number starting to double at that point? What do you see at that size?
Yeah, it's a size where things are getting more complicated because again, you're moving from everybody knows like the executive team, it's really small, like and really all those people are really bought into those individuals to now that you're trying to hire people to be bought into the company, you need somebody to be thinking as like a strategist for how to use talent effectively, how to empower them, how to help them grow and learn, but then also again tie that back to where's the company trying to go and be a really strong advocate for um, not not like making rash decisions, but making pointed and uh, thoughtful ones. Especially since I really just like to think about people as your best capital. It's I know a lot of finance leaders will say that it's a budget line on on the spreadsheet and it's losing money because of benefits and all this stuff, and especially if you think about G&A functions, we are typically the ones that use money and not always put money back in. Um, but I think using it, seeing it more as capital of how do you invest appropriately. Um, I think that that is really just the best way to think about it all.
It's leveraging the capital you have,
Mm-hmm.
which is human capital, right? And I think you're right. I think people look at technology, they look at everything, they're like, oh, this
Mm-hmm.
is either making us money or whatever. But the reality is, typically, biggest budget line item is personnel,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really how do we get more out of the personnel? Because here's what I always believe when I do keynotes and I consult with companies too. I look at that and I say, what if everyone gave 10% more? What if everyone was more effective? What if
Mm-hmm.
everyone was more bought in? Like what is the impact that potentially could have on the bottom line? And that's when people they go, "Oh, I hadn't thought of it that way." Well, if that is part of an HR
Mm-hmm.
function, then you look at it instead of just being this purely, sunk cost center,
Yep.
it is strategic. It is
It is.
strategic. So, what you look at, you were talking about, kind of these certain size companies. What's one simple system you wish every startup had, let's say by the time they had 20, 25 employees? Something that they systematized or something by then. Any ideas? Or is it just HR? Is it just defining culture?
I think it's just HR because the thing is there's so many different systems to be putting in place. Um, you know, I will say, uh, if you don't pay people on time and correctly, nothing you do matters. Like, because that's kind of at the end of the day, that's table stakes. So if you don't pay people on time and don't do it well, um, and you don't give them their benefits on time, like all those really just core basic things, you could have the best onboarding program in the world, you could have the best performance management program in the world, but if you can't do that, really nothing else matters.
Is this an issue in smaller companies especially early on as they're growing?
Um, I think it's more thinking, and again, I really try to get away from HR being just compliance, but that is something where if you don't know the nuances uh, in the US, globally, I think about an example of like somebody leaves an organization and there's some really clear laws on like when you need to pay someone their last paycheck. If they leave on their own accord, if they if you let them go, there's like a lot of kind of just very small laws that depending on what state they're in or even what country they're in, like you need to know it, and if you don't have somebody that's an expert that can help you navigate those, you know you could get yourself in trouble. and make others feel really frustrated, um, which of course impacts the culture and all the other things we've already talked about on this podcast.
Yeah. And it's fascinating as I've been around, especially HR, there's
Mm-hmm.
so much. I went to an HR law course, and this is years after I was already in leadership,
Mm-hmm.
management, hiring, and it just scared the out of me
Mm-hmm.
because what I realized is a lot of the legal things don't always get passed down to people in leadership roles,
Mm-hmm.
and like questions I would ask in interviews or the way
Mm-hmm.
we handle something. How do you help a small company avoid the risk of, potential litigation because of personnel problems, because they don't know, they don't understand the law. They don't understand that there are laws around this, and this.
Yeah, I mean, so I do actually offer strategic advisory. So for smaller organizations that just need to gut check, like, can we do this? That's always a way that I can support those businesses. But then also if I'm there, it's really just saying like, let's not make any people decision without me being part of it. Because the worst thing that can happen is people basically seeing HR as the cleanup crew and instead of a strategic driver for, growth and revenue. Um, so yeah, it's just talk to HR early, even if it's even an idea. You're like, I think someone's underperforming. I think I want to let somebody go. What do we need to be thinking about? And then, of course, you can help them there. Or, hey, we're about to do some recruiting. I want to ask somebody about. I'm kind of worried that they might be they might have kids soon. Can I ask that in the interview? The answer is no. Listeners, the answer is no. You can't ask that in the interview. Um, so
Uh,
that
but
like that sort of stuff.
what about the blind spots? So the blind spot meaning I I didn't know to ask. I
Mm,
didn't know to ask our HR. I didn't know to ask about it. Do you provide, or is that something you could do for an organization? Because I know unless they've been through this themselves and they've had the training, there's a lot of risk and they end up making mistakes that can bite them on. Is that something that you could do to an organization where they said, hey,
mhm,
proactively come in, tell me what I need to know ahead of time so I don't
mhm.
screw things up, so I don't dig a hole?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely can run trainings. I actually have run multiple, just even in my career in general, like multiple manager effectiveness trainings. And just even thinking about in recruiting, what are the do's and don'ts in, how to and really run an effective one-on-one. Um, and also putting together trainings on onboarding, offboarding, kind of what to do, what not to do. And actually I am going to be doing a stop the funding, stop funding your competitors talent pipeline training in
What does
January.
that mean?
Yeah, so it's just basically it's going to be all around career development on how to uh, have an effective one-on-one, what to think about when it comes to an actual tool. So I love the talent card, which just a really simple career development uh, document to really think about where the person is staying, where they want to go, and then how do they get there. And it could be living and breathing. Um, but then also the biggest piece too is training up your managers because they're the ones on the front lines. They're the ones that, need to know this information. So making sure that that they have the tools in their tool belt to be effective. Because if you think about it, if anybody leaves or anything happens, that can have a really big impact to the bottom line.
So tell me the name. What's the class or course or event?
Yeah.
What's it called again?
It says stop funding your competitors' talent pipeline. Uh,
And okay, so what does that specifically mean in that title? That's what I was kind of getting at. I'm like, what
yeah,
what does that mean?
meaning if you
Is
don't
it
have,
stop funding their pipeline? Is that what it
mm-hmm,
is?
yep.
Okay.
So basically, if you don't invest in your people and you're not being proactive in conversations about where somebody wants to go, what they want to do, and being just thoughtful, that person's going to leave, and anywhere between 50 to 200% of that person's salary is walking out the door because it's going to take that much to uh, basically find their replacement, and that knowledge has value and has power. So in it, it is seen that 18%. Um, there is 18% higher productivity for leaders that are trained because they're empowered to make good decisions and actually be able to really manage more effectively because they know where the people want to go, what they want to do, but also being honest about kind of how performance is.
The whole goal there is retaining your best people
Hmm.
instead of providing them to a competitor. Is that
Exactly.
really what we're talking about?
Exactly.
Yeah. What is one thing you wish founders, business owners, executives, what's one thing you wish they really understood, um, that if they knew this, it would totally change how they start and build and their HR, their team, etc.
I wish that they knew that
Strategic value of HR,
yeah,
maybe?
yeah, basically the strategic value of HR. And yes, your COO and CFO can do some of this work at the beginning, but HR is so much more than just compliance and hitting a payroll button. Um, and it can be very tempting when you get funding to invest in the cooler areas, marketing, product, like those are the things that are forward facing, and it's really where I think a lot of investment goes. But the G&A functions, HR, like there is value there, and um, HR is an art and a science.
Right, and I think it's tough, as people listen, they go, "No, if someone's listening, they're going to say, I'm going to put all my money in sales. No, I'm going to put it all here, all here." The problem that I see, and as I talk to CEOs and executives, is there's not one answer. There's so many moving parts, and I think that's what makes it tough. Is i- it's so critical that you say, yeah, if we're not driving revenue, we're going to be out of business. And if we
Sure.
don't have a product, if we're a
Hmm.
tech company, let's say we're going to be, or a manufacturer, we're out of business. But the problem is if you don't have people, you're out of business. And
Exactly.
like you said, they're going to be walking out the door. And I think that's the tough thing is how do we balance all of these moving parts and how do we look at it as a system,
Hmm.
just like if it's a machine, I'll use a lawnmower. If one part of my lawnmower is not working that's critical, I can't mow the lawn. And to say it's only the wheels, it's only the carburetor, it's only the gas, it's only the oil, right? And I think sometimes in businesses we tend to do that. And especially HR, what I've seen is that, just to your point, and I love how you articulated it, they don't see that it could be a strategic component
Hmm.
to the business. And I don't know if you have any additional commentary on that, but that's my thought on that.
Yeah. Um, I read this really great, quote, and I forgot who said it, but basically the strategic HR is just as important as the CEO because they see everything. They are like, just as a CEO is thinking about the strategic, um, you know, vision and growth and kind of looking forward facing to make sure that the business, you know, excels, but HR is sitting right next to the CEO in many cases because they also are seeing things from a holistic point of view because they can see really the forest through the trees and see where is something broken and how can we effectively make that uh better. And what I mean by broken is not necessarily maybe like product process and how how the product roadmap is set up, but the the relationships on those teams and maybe where maybe a breakdown is and why communication is not being as effective. HR has a very strong voice there and can actually, if they're doing their jobs really well and are sitting on all these different team meetings and watching kind of those relationships, they can be a voice to say, okay, I know where the problem is. Let's do these like three different things uh, to fix it. And then from there, you'll see process improve. So one really great example is back when I was in-house, one of the projects I worked on was a process workflow. There was a lot of different processes happening across the organization, a very specific area. And basically, what happened was we consolidated it under one leader. So basically, streamlined the process. So that means we weren't running four different processes, we're running one. And that actually led to millions of dollar savings because there was a problem with process. We consolidated teams, and then we're able to save money because that process was more efficient. And that's the power of HR.
Cool. That's cool. So if people can start to understand strategically how it can impact, that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So two last questions. First of the last question is goes to the name of the podcast, right? Inside the leader's mind.
Mm-hmm.
What's in the way becomes the way. What is something for you that was a barrier, was an obstacle, and because of that, that became the way for you? Either because you went through it or you realized I need to go around it.
Yeah. Um, I think earlier in my career I was not the best at receiving feedback. And when there was actually for me, it was the turning point of becoming a mom where, you know, you just, because you're already in chaos all the time already, and you're just managing so much, and trying to make the impossible possible with, you know, raising kids, running the household, then having, uh, a, a job that is very fulfilling. Um, there was just, for me, it was the turning point was like being able to say, okay, you know what, I now like I feel like now I'm in a headspace where I want to learn, I want to grow, and I always wanted that, but I think it was just letting down that guard and saying, what's good enough, and um how can I make sure that I show up in the ways that I want to everywhere. And listening, you have to you have to become such a good listener when you have a toddler and they're telling you exactly how they feel, and you get some real good feedback that way.
Yeah, no kidding. No, it's just wait till they get older. Ugh.
Mm-hmm.
All right, last question. Actually, I'll tie it to kids because this is part of where I got this question. So the question is, and don't answer just yet because I want to explain to our listeners if they haven't heard this before. But the question is, what's the question you wish people would ask you, but they don't ask you? Very few people have ever asked you this, but you kind of secretly wish people would ask you. And where this comes from is a couple places. When I was young, aunts and uncles would say, how's school? How are you? And then they ran out of questions because they didn't really know what to ask me. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, why don't you ask me this? Or if you watch interviews with celebrities or athletes or whatever, they're always asked the same question. And I'm thinking when I'm watching, I'm in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, God, do they get sick of the same silly question? Like they must be thinking, why don't you ask me this question? This would be a great question. Or with my own kids, I've got three. And, if you ask too many questions, you're invading their privacy. And then in a second breath, they say, you don't know anything about me. So it's like, okay, what question should I ask you? What do you wish, mom and dad would ask you so that we have a better understanding? You know what I mean? So the question for you that I'd like to end with is, what's a question you wish people would ask you, but they don't because they don't know to ask you?
um it would be, why do you love music so much? So I grew up
Whoa.
singing. I'm actually an alto, and I'm obsessed with Broadway, like obsessed. Like I watched the latest Wicked movie, and I, of course, was comparing it to the onstage version, and like trying to talk with some fellow parents this past weekend with as we were chatting about the movie, and I had all of this intel around like, oh, well, this is how the music's different, and this is where the this is where you have to appreciate the art of the movie versus the stage version. And these are some things, nuances I learned and observed for watching it. And there's just, for me, it's like music has always been such a big part of my life. And but it's just not something I talk about very often, just because I'm not in a choir, I'm not on the stage right now, but I love to sing. uh and I actually did take some voice lessons for a little bit this past year to get better at get better at a few songs to sing with my kids, and bring that back into my life. But that's just some people don't really know about me and don't really know to ask.
That is so cool. I love that you shared that. That is really cool. You'll have to meet my girls because, man, they are so into Broadway and music, and this is what they do all the
Mhm.
time. And they talk about, well, this person's voice and this one and this, and
Mhm.
and I can't keep up with it. So anyway, well, if someone wants to learn more about Culture Crew or you, what is the best way for them to learn more or get in touch? Either way.
Yeah, sure. So, one, LinkedIn, Karina Bensko. I'm always checking my messages and such. Or if you are interested in having a longer conversation on where your company is today, where you want to go, and just want to have a free consult, Karina at culturecrew.com, and we can find some time to just chat and see where you're at and how I might be able to help.
And the website is,
www.culturecrew.com.
and that's spelled
Cultr. I should know this.
so funny. Enough fun culture, but crew with a K.
Yeah. Culture Crew
Yeah.
with a K.
Yeah.
KREW.com.
And I'll make sure I put that in the show notes. So I didn't mean to stump you on your own website. So anyway, no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Well, Karina, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for being with me
Yeah.
today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Well, my pleasure. So reach out to Karina if she can help you or if you want to learn more. And folks, if you've enjoyed this, please share it, like it, let us know, subscribe. We really appreciate it and appreciate your patronage. So and being a part of this. I'm David Susan, and this is Inside the Leader's Mind. Until next time, ciao.